Will Donald Trump run for a third term? A highly debated issue. I'm here with friend of the show, Cameron Kasky, to talk about this because top Republicans are now floating this idea. They have been for a while. How you doing today, Cameron?
I'm all right, dude. It's like, this happens with almost every single issue at this point. Is there's something sort of inflammatory that was said about Trump in years past, and that sort of made it so when it's said about Trump again, people say, oh, come on, that's just crazy talk. But then Trump continues to prove that he might just push even harder and harder on these things until suddenly the worst nightmares about Trump from 2016 and 2020 are a reality. Let's take a look at this video of Rand Paul where he sort of tips the Republican Party's hand.
I think we're going to discourage good people, successful people from holding office. Part of the bill, I do believe, would forbid the president immediately from buying and selling stocks, and it would exempt him from the divestiture part. Future presidents wouldn't be allowed to own things. So if Donald Trump were the next president, which, some say he might run for a third term, but he would be forced to divest everything. He would have to sell all of his possessions. And I think Donald Trump's got a complicated, probably financial empire. And a lot of people just wouldn't want to sell it or get involved with all of that. You also don't want to sell it during a downturn. There's a lot of reasons it would discourage successful people. And I frankly think that some of the success of Donald Trump being president is that he was used to the world of high finance, used to making deals with large amounts of money. Yep. And I don't think we want to discourage people like that from holding office.
Okay, fair enough.
That third term comment was in and of itself wild, but that's wrapped in something even more wild. He's talking about an insider trading bill. And this bill was originally called the Pelosi Act. It was going to stop senators, representatives, and presidents from trading stocks. So nobody in the executive branch or Congress. And they changed it to the Honest Act because Democrats weren't going to vote for the Pelosi Act, understandably. So now that the Honest Act was on the table, Democrats were on board. They were down for it. But Trump told Republicans not to vote for the Honest Act unless you make an exemption for the president and the vice president for the next 4 years. So now we have a bill that advanced that basically stops people from trading stocks if you're in Congress, but the president gets to until 2028. So what Rand Paul was saying there was, listen, I know that this exempts Trump and allows him to be more and more corrupt, but the problem is, what if he wants to run for a third term and then be even more corrupt in 2028? What, don't we want him to be exempt in a third term? So it's all insane.
Yeah, I mean, I'm totally with the people in Congress not being able to trade stocks thing. I think that that's something a lot of people can get behind. I hate handing it to the Republicans, but in order to be considered a fair commentator, I will say, while I would not have called it the Pelosi Act, I do think that that's kind of funny. But regardless, Trump is doing the sort of cartoonish Trump corruption here by saying, yeah, you can totally pass this unless it makes me have to be held accountable. Yep. But I also kind of think that Trump doesn't really know his financial situation. I think so much of it is tied up in these really complex crypto scams and, financial interests that are tied to very, very shady billionaires that are probably playing him a little bit. I think Trump just sort of has this awareness that his current level of fraud and corruption is lining his pockets, but I don't think he has an actual outline in his head of what the current Trump financial model is. I think he's just being told by his financial advisors and, fellow conspirators that he is in fact making money. And he's like, okay, great. Just, let me know if there's any law that I need to shoot down or any string that I need to pull to be making more money. But all this is to say, I think that Trump corruption is just complicated because I'm really not convinced he's calling his own shots here. I think he's got people whispering in his ear, and I think a lot of those people have separate interests of their own.
He just has a vague notion that this hurts his bottom line, and he literally has people whispering in his ear because there are a bunch of clips of him signing executive orders, and he asks, what am I signing? And then Will Scharf, his deputy chief of staff, will be like, oh, this is an executive order to do this or that. So it's like, bro.
Meanwhile, he's crying about the auto pen and Joe Biden using the auto pen where
you don't even know what your
presidents have used.
He doesn't even know what he's signing whatsoever. But this brings us on to the main topic. Do you think he runs for a third term?
You had said this to me before we started recording. It's like, is this an actual threat that we're facing, or is this a Republican talking point that Trump sent out so the party can lend to this larger narrative that is ultimately a distraction. I think that Trump's distractions are very successful all the time. I think even now, even only a couple days, weeks from the most recent giant bombs in the Epstein story, he has been able to divert attention away from the Epstein stuff to a certain extent. I understand that it's journalists' responsibility to report on the news, and it can't just be 24 hours coverage of Epstein every day. But there's a lot of things that I think Donald Trump is going to do to divert people's attention away. I think that he's just kind of leaving the door open for a potential third run. I think that he hasn't completely committed to it yet. I think that he is still working out a bunch of the kinks here, but it's obviously entirely possible. He has proven to us in this second administration that even the worst Trump nightmares are all reality. But you have a different perspective on this, I think.
Yeah, we were talking a bit about this before, and I said I wanted to go against the grain because a lot of people say that Trump's third-term threats are completely real, and I understand that. For a while, I was a little bit worried and scared about them, but I think that's actually the point. I think he wants people to panic and be hyper-focused. The reason I started to second guess, and here's why my instincts have led me this way. The person who came up with this whole third-term thing was Steve Bannon. Now, Steve Bannon is a very clever strategist. He always looks like a mess. He's always really disheveled.
3 layers at a time. He's always wearing a jacket and then a shirt and then another shirt.
He looks like a mad effing scientist all the time with his hair crazy and shit. But dude, he's a really clever political strategist. He came up with the flood the zone strategy, which is where you just do crazy story after crazy story. You tweet crazy stuff 20 times a day so the news can't keep up, and then you have the upper hand. So he's created this strategy to flood the zone. And he also created the third term thing. If you track it back, Steve Bannon began to create the memes of post about a third term, joke about a third term. And here's where the nuance comes in, because it's actually a threat. You asked earlier, is this just a Republican talking point? Or is this something we should actually be worried about? It's both for sure. They use it as a distraction, but it's a sign of normalizing authoritarianism. So while Donald Trump talks about a third term, he's actually dismantling a lot of the guardrails with voter rights in the midterms. They're redistricting and gerrymandering. They're genuinely stealing the midterms through legal means with gerrymandering. So I think they kind of throw shit out there, and it's a Steve Bannon strategy. If you think about it through the Steve Bannon framework, he literally just wants to rile people up, make them look that way, while Trump over here is pulling some sleight of hand. And we should talk about the third term, but it's a little bit of a bait and switch, in my opinion. So that's the conclusion I've come to.
The other interesting thing to look at here is the fact that this comment was made by Rand Paul. Because everyone in the Republican Party has bent the knee to MAGA. There's no democracy at play. There's nothing other than Murkowski crying about how she really didn't mean it. She made an oopsie voting for the big I guess not beautiful bill. Thank you, Chuck Schumer, for renaming it. But Rand Paul, as far as MAGA people go, is not one of the most loyal talking point spewers. Rand Paul will say things that diverge in one way or another from the larger MAGA narrative. And again, I don't want to make it seem like he's some actual dark horse, independent thinking, principled conservative who's not ultimately gonna go with Trump on everything, but it's just the third term stuff. Rand Paul seems like if there's gonna be one Republican who's not playing that game, it would be him. I'm sort of putting on my tinfoil hat here, but I don't think believe me, I have way tinfoilier thoughts. I think that this is proof that the Republican Party has had regular threats made by the Trump administration if they do not parrot specific things that the Trump administration tells them to say. And just Rand Paul going with this feels like one of our biggest hints yet that there is probably some sort of transmission from the administration to Republicans in office, and it probably lets them know that there's going to be some sort of punishment if they don't go with the narrative. And I know that Trump already does this publicly, but I also think it's happening behind the scenes.
Oh, yeah. There's no doubt about the idea that when Donald Trump makes up some conspiracy or gives marching orders, Republicans follow that to a T. I guess with Rand Paul, I'm going to give the really boring answer, but I think the boring answer here what happened was like he's taking a really unpopular position on Fox News with the stock trading bill. Most Americans think that congressional people should be banned from trading stocks. So Rand Paul felt the need to throw some red meat to the base, the MAGA base, and just like throw in that little quip to distract them. Because if you read like the broader context of the clip, he's making an argument for the rich and only for the rich. He's like, listen, my rich business friends won't be able to run for Congress and consolidate power. And then he makes a joke about Trump running for a third term. But with all of that being said, it's a scary normalization of authoritarianism. So Rand Paul made the calculation that he's willing to flirt with authoritarianism so that his rich friends can get into Congress.
Rand Paul, the libertarian, by the way.
Yeah, for real. It's like a perfect microcosm. It's like, listen, I'm willing to make a joke about Trump having the third term, despite being a quote unquote libertarian, if it means my rich friends aren't hurt by Congress. That's the entire trade-off Republicans are making.
Yeah, the only thing about Rand Paul that is truly an advocate for freedom is his hair, which is running a little too free. Adam, thank you for hanging out today. I will probably talk to you immediately when this video is done recording. Everybody, leave a comment down below of something that will put comments down below because that's good for YouTube. Everybody, with Bulwark, with Mockler Media, we're Cameron and Adam. Thanks for tuning in.
Always a pleasure.